In Cigars, the journey of wisdom, the shrinking world, 3D printing, Elon Musk and Houdini, and the state as anti-humanity. Hello and welcome to Live All Your Life. Today is a special episode we call the Parlor Sessions, and we're going to get into a fine discussion with my friend Joseph Fetz. We'll discuss fine cigars plus all of those things. Next week, definitely catch the show as we finish up the conversation, discussing all kinds of things from his work as a media consultant, to his move to the Free State Project, his future sitcom, Brutalism, Bitcoin. It gets good, folks. And you don't want to miss next week as well as we introduce you to Tiger Lily GZZ and her attempt to get away from it all as an anarchist. She's going to be riding her Victory Kingpin motorcycle through Mexico by herself. I cannot wait for that interview. So stay tuned for next week. It's going to be awesome. But all the great conversation of cigars and getting in deep all starts right now. I wanted to welcome Joseph Fetz and have a little bit of a chat here. This is a segment that we're going to call the Parlor Sessions, and it's basically the idea that I want to have here is like in the old classic movies in the 1930s and 40s, where the folks would keep conversation light around the dinner table and save the really good stuff for after dinner, and they'd shuffle off to the parlor and pour themselves an adult beverage and maybe light up some tobacco products and just chat about interesting things. Usually in those movies, that was a turning point, for the story to progress, and light conversation would turn into deep thoughts. But that may or may not happen today. But welcome, Joseph.
Oh, thanks, Cody. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So,
and happy Father's Day. I understand you're a father, so.
I am, father of three. Thank you. Yep. Probably going to squeeze in a barbecue somehow, but it's raining cats and dogs here, so it looks like you lucked out in the weather department where you are.
Yeah, it was a little warm today, mid-80s, a little humid, but other than that, everything was sunny all day, and really can't complain. Nice breeze, very nice.
Cool. So we each brought a cigar today to experience. Would you like to share with everybody what you're smoking there?
This is a Padron 2000. It's essentially a Robusto, and it's also a Maduro wrap, so it's a little spicier than your average. This is what I call my daily smoker. I mean, it is, compared to other brands, it's a little cheaper. It might cost between $6 to $8, depending on where you go. But for me, I had to find something that I could smoke regularly that wouldn't eat away at my wallet. So obviously, it took me a long time of searching to find it, and finally, a real old fella who I met at the local cigar shop. I was just talking to him, and I was asking him what he was smoking. He's the guy that introduced it to me.
Right on. And where's that from?
It's a Nicaraguan. I prefer Nicaraguan blends myself because they tend to be a little sweeter, not quite as dry, a little less salty, very, very robust when it comes to flavor. They're not for the uninitiated, typically.
Right on. So I'll be smoking a CAO Brasilia, actually a pretty similar profile to what you just explained. Similar size, also a Maduro wrapper. It is a Nicaraguan blend, but this one has a Brazil wrapper, and it has nothing to do with the World Cup or anything, but that's where I'm at today. It's kind of an interesting concept, traditionally, and I don't know if it's because of regulation or this kind of thing, but in the realm of spirits, single barrel, single grains, single sourced materials have always had sort of a higher respect than a lot of the blended materials. But I'm starting to see a trend in whiskey where the blends are getting a lot more respect, and also in cigars. This one has tobacco from two different countries, and it's assembled in Nicaragua. So, it's interesting to see that world become smaller, and we get to reap the benefits of it.
Yeah, gotta love trade, especially nowadays. It's so easy compared if you think, 200, 300 years ago. I mean, just traveling across the Atlantic, was quite a feat.
Right.
Nowadays, it's like goods could move within a day or two. I mean, wintertime here, you're getting strawberries and other sorts of fruits and stuff like that. And in fact, just yesterday, I bought some figs, fresh figs. I always love when they come around, them and cherries.
Right, right. I experienced figs for the first time a couple of years ago. Figs with honey is pretty awesome on a warm summer day.
Oh yeah, and that's it's a very cool taste, a fig. Very very subtle. It's not strong the sweetness, but it's definitely a good flavor when it comes to fruits and whatnot.
Right, right. So what are you sipping on today?
Today I'm sipping on what's called the Famous Grouse. It's a whiskey that's actually very cheap compared to your other scotches. It's it's not a single malt or anything like that. It's a blend, I believe, of three different whiskeys. It's actually the most popular whiskey in Scotland. And so when I heard that, I was like, maybe they know what they're talking about, considering they're Scots, So I picked it up when I found it one day, and I haven't turned back since. It's about the smoothest Scotch I've ever had up to now.
Right on. Would you describe any sort of peatiness to that, or is it?
This one is actually their original, so it's not very peaty. And I used to be a big fan of those. I liked my Scotch to taste like a campfire. But they do make another version called the Black Grouse, which is the peated version of this. It's not exactly the same. Obviously there's a slightly different process, but it comes from the same distilleries, so it is the peated version. But it's very hard to find at times. It runs out very quickly when the stores stock it. So.
Right on. I'll definitely have to check that out. Sounds like it fits my budget better too. I have a curse of, I have this friend that introduced me to both cigars and most whiskeys and that kind of thing. He kind of got me hooked on all these. He's a terrible influence, but he also started me off with some of the best stuff you can buy, and I'm like, I just can't keep up with that. So, but it definitely led me down the rabbit hole. So today I'm going to be sipping on some Elmer T. Lee, pretty popular national brand, hailing from the distillery Buffalo Trace, actually. But this is a single barrel version, so it's a little bit higher up on the cost. It's a 90 proof bourbon. But it's really well balanced. I mean, this is just kind of a good, smooth sipper. So, enjoy.
Yeah, see, the problem I found when it comes to any kind of bourbon, Scotch, any kind of whiskey, is that once you get the good stuff, it gets very, very expensive.
Yeah.
And I used to, I think the cheapest I used to go with was, like, say, a Johnny Walker Red for a while, and I just cannot drink that stuff straight. So I actually made my own drink, and I called it the Furious Libertarian, because it's an inside joke. It came up, Stephen Kinsella one day on his Facebook page was joking about it, and he's like, we should call that a drink, and I'm like, well, I already made it. And basically all it was however much Scotch you want to actually put in your glass, and then a little water on that, and then a squirt of lemon juice on that. And that's where the whole libertarian part comes in, the gold and also the harshness of the whiskey itself. So
there you go.
my proudest moment. I made my own drink.
I might add some bitters to it and call it the Bitter Libertarian. Or something.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's other. It's actually kind of like a variation on a highball in a way, but you can definitely mix it up as with anything.
Right on. That Johnny Walker Red reminds me of my trip to Mexico. because being a bourbon fanatic, you tend to think of some of the things that you love and have access to as being ubiquitous. But you go to Mexico and they don't even know what bourbon is. They've never even heard of it, where I was anyway. And whiskey. Okay, well, they had two whiskeys. It was good or a little bit better, and Johnny Walker Red was about the only choice you had anywhere you went. So I quickly got into pina coladas and just went with it.
Yeah. Or those guys with the whistles that pour whatever liqueur down your throat. Have you ever seen those guys?
Yeah, I got to experience that firsthand. There's some incriminating
afterwards.
Yeah, there's some incriminating video of me at somewhere floating around of that.
Yeah, that seems to be all over Mexico. Any kind of bar or club you go to, those guys are around.
I was a little disappointed, though. I thought it was actually going to be tequila, and it was some fruity drink there.
Yeah, it's some liqueur of some sort, and it's probably completely like mostly sugar, not even much alcohol.
Yeah,
they're just looking for a tip. You give them $1 or $2, and they're happy.
It's like a cooler.
Yeah. Pretty much.
So, how did you get started with cigars and the fine drinks?
Interestingly, it's related to what we talked about on Mike's show a few weeks ago. I was in the Navy, and obviously you're in other countries, and you have access to Cubans. Mm-hmm. And, I was like, well, obviously I'm going to try them. I've heard so much, so like I tried it, and I was like, I didn't really like it at the time. Like, it didn't really turn me on then. But I think maybe a year after that, the first time, I bought some Cohibas and some Romeo y Julietas and a few of those. I got back stateside. I said, maybe I'm going to try this again. So I tried some of the, Nicaraguans, Dominican Republic, and Colombia's. Is it Colombia? Tried a variety, and I ended up sticking with the Nicaraguan blends that I was like, ooh, this tastes good, which is kind of funny because Cubans are supposed to be like the standard, but really, they're not that great, right. In my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, for the price, I would have to agree with you. I have access to them. Actually, it was part of my Bitcoin story, is that I found a place you can actually get Cubans with Bitcoin. I don't know if I just incriminated myself or not. Maybe I'll edit this out before before it goes up. But it's we get them in, and it's a couple of dollars more expensive than anything I'm going to get here locally for just a good cigar. It's right. I don't know that I think people want what they can't have, I guess. So
there's actually a decent cigar that's really cheap that I found. Well, one is the it's a Fuente Curly Head. Mm. Those are somewhat cheaper. I mean, they're not. I prefer a Robusto, but every now and again I'll pick them up just because they're cheap. And another one is Drew Estate. I don't know if you ever heard them. They're pretty well known for infused cigars and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But they have one that's called La Vieja Habana. And it's what's called a Cuban sandwich. So it's not all long filler. It's kind of a mix between different fillers and then sandwiched over. But surprisingly, it tastes very good. It smokes very fast, but it definitely tastes pretty good.
That's great. Thanks for the recommendation.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So do you ever order your cigars online, or do you buy local?
Well, I've done it online, and you definitely get a real good deal. As far as buying in bulk or buying bundles, like you can find no-name bundles. It's always a crapshoot, but you can find some real good ones every now and again. But I do a mixture of both. I mean, there's a really, really good cigar shop where I live, and I mean, it's just walls full of, the whole place is a humidor essentially, and a lot of people get into really good conversation and stuff like that. It's a good place to hang out every now and again. They got nice couches and tables. You can't drink, but oh well. Right.
Same in this state. They pretty much have separated smoking and drinking from any public square. Other than there are a handful of restaurants in the Portland area that had deep enough pockets or knew the right people to get grandfathered in. So it's a really interesting thing how they instituted these laws statewide, but there's about 6 or 7 restaurants in town that you can actually go and smoke a cigar and drink at the same time.
I refuse to call them laws. I will only call them statutes.
Okay.
There's different. Yeah,
Right
law is typically apodictic, whereas a statute's just an arbitrary dictate. So.
Right. Yes. I like that distinction. That's great. So have you been, since I order cigars online, I've been getting these emails. I'm assuming maybe you've gotten them too for the FDA regulations that they are kind of worried about being implemented before too long.
I get so many emails from these, cigar.
Apparently, it's 250 new pages of regulation for premium cigars.
Right.
And it's interesting. Out of 250 pages, I haven't read through it or anything, but the one sticky spot that all the cigar companies are trying to get people to rally against is the definition of a premium cigar being any cigar that is $10 or more per stick.
Huh.
And their theory on that is that if you regulate that, then all companies are going to basically raise the prices to make sure that every stick sold is at least $10 so that they can be in the premium category.
Right. Yeah, I could see that happening. See, they always forget the unintended circumstance, results of what they do. I mean, essentially, anytime they mess with the market, it's going to change the price structure, no matter what. I mean, that's all they can really do is change the price structure. If you look at almost every single regulation, it's almost, if you break it down to its smallest little detail, it's almost always a price control of some sort. Mm-hmm. I mean, even taxes, it's a price control. It's raising the price of the good, and that's going to lower demand. And that's actually, and another thing is they understand things like tobacco, which does, it is addictive and whatnot, or things like alcohol. The demand curve is very inelastic. It doesn't, if you change the price, say 20%, it's not going to change much of the demand that's going for it. And the result is, the reason why they do this is because they know they'll get more tax revenue taxing goods that have inelastic demand curves.
Sure.
So, they know exactly what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure they know that other companies are going to raise their price on other cigars so that can be called, premium or whatever arbitrary word they're going to use to define it.
Right.
And who does it hurt? Hurts the consumer, the one that wants the good.
Oh, sure. And it's interesting to me that they're using such a tired old reasoning because I made the mistake, and it was probably a few years ago, back when I still believed in, trying to use the state or voting and this kind of thing, sign petitions, and I think I probably signed a petition at some point.
Selling your soul to the state.
Yes, yeah, and so here it is, a couple of years later, and the state is contacting me saying, hey, now's your chance. Now's your final chance to tell us why we should not regulate or whatever, and their plea with me as a voter is think of the children. It's
always the children.
Yeah, and they start spouting all these statistics about how they know that underage smokers are getting access to premium cigars and such, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know. I was a kid once, and the last thing I ever would have thought of is $10 or $12 cigar.
Right.
If I was gonna, it's kind of like your average high schooler is probably not going to get this bourbon either.
No.
They're not going to pay $44 when they can get drunk off a $3, $2 check or whatever.
Right.
So, but it's an interesting. I just can't believe they use the same tired old reasoning to get this stuff in the door, and then they just go rampant. Because I'm thinking, well, first of all, these are already not legal to sell to minors, right? Under existing statutes. So why do we need another 250 pages to spell that out again? It's just it's a ridiculous game.
Like you said, they always use that ridiculous excuse, and they have no shame in what they use it for. They'll even use it to sell a war with people. Like for instance, Iraq, the first one, the first Persian Gulf War, it was babies in incubators and and all that. And then with Syria, it was women and children there. Luckily with Syria, we didn't actually they're arming people there, but they didn't actually go in and bomb the people there to bloody bits.
Right.
Which is the only thing they can do. And it's pretty horrible. They always bring that thing up and tug at the heartstrings, and unfortunately it works because most people are really quite ignorant to the political process, how it works and what its purpose is.
Right. Right. So speaking of, some of your recent posts on Facebook and such, you've been indicating some questioning of your own belief systems and sort of your quest in your journey of knowledge. And I was wondering if you'd want to talk about that a little bit, about where you came from, kind of where you're at, and where you think you might be going on some of these ideas.
Well, anybody that knows me well knows that I'm always doubting my ability to I guess know what the truth is. Okay, I'm always wanting to know what it is, but I'm always it's always a battle to find it. And lately, I guess I was just going through like this kind of questioning of myself, wondering, am I really the guy to go out there and tell other people, this is what's correct, this is what's incorrect? And, ultimately, I came to a conclusion that I'm probably going to do it anyway. It's just part of the way I am. I've been like that since, my entire life. I'm always reading as much as I can, learning as much as I can, and I want, I share that with others, I discuss it with others. But it came down to, I was wondering if perhaps I was becoming too ideological in my thinking and not really, I was, and this had to do with a long period of reading stuff that, I was starting to go, well, that's a good response to that question, and I didn't think about that before. But then I realized, well, that's the evolution of knowledge. That's how it always goes. You never know everything. You never know the answer to everything, and you're constantly trying to get closer to it. So there's really no reason to, I guess, get down in the dumps about the fact that you don't know it all. It's that's true of everybody. I mean, Aristotle, you can look back at him and go, what the hell was he thinking about this or that? Or Plato, in the Republic and everything else. It's like, what the heck, It's I guess that's the evolution of human thought, is that, it's everybody's going to be wrong no matter what at some period. They're not always going to be right. And indeed, if they were always right, there would probably be very little reason to continue on. What are you going to do? I already know this is going to happen 2 seconds from now. And it happens. It takes all the joy out of life, I think, if you did actually indeed know everything and you were like a superhuman. I looking back, I think I was just afraid that I might have been looking like an idiot in front of people. It's like I was so sure of things, and then I say them, and then and I look back and go, maybe I was being an idiot there. And then even looking back further, because I've been online for like 8 years doing stuff, and I look back at some stuff from like 5 years ago that nobody else would even know about, or 6 years ago, because I was an anonymous, and I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? But then again, that looking at what I think now, I definitely see that I've progressed since then. But the fear is what I'll think of what I'm saying today in the future.
Right. Right. We see this happen as artists as well. You come out with something that you think is just, oh man, this is the best work I've ever done, and then even a few months later, you can look back on it and be like, wow, that was crap.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't put it out there. Like you were mentioning Plato and Aristotle, and we can even go into more modern times with just all of the libertarian thinkers that are out there, and the disagreements that they have with each other, and all this the noise that's going on.
Yeah.
But that noise is exactly how we're going to progress,
Right. That's how you get to the answers.
Yeah.
Through that exchange, that discussion, and trying to get to the root of the problem itself.
Yeah, yeah. And I was really inspired kind of around the same time. Jeffrey Tucker had mentioned something about this, and a fellow that I watch, I don't even know the guy's name, unfortunately, but it's lengthyounarther or something like that on YouTube.
Okay.
I'll link to his channel below mine just so people can have a shot at seeing who I'm talking about. And he's just a guy in his room, basically, who spouts off. But the guy's extremely well read, and he pulls up quotes from books that he read 2 years ago. I don't know how he does it.
Some of those people are just got a memory like a steel trap. It's like, what the hell? How do you do that?
Right. And he's one of those guys, and they both right around the same time came out and just was they're putting out there, we need more voices. We need you to step forward and be a voice. And I really wanted to start my own channel and that kind of thing, but I was basically exactly what you're talking about. It's like, man, I'm still I feel like an infant in my progression of knowledge. Maybe 20 years from now I'll have something decent to say. But what their point was, though, is that we need as many voices. Even if you feel like you're just regurgitating what somebody else said, you're not going to phrase it exactly how they did.
Right, and somebody might understand it because you phrased it a different way. They might latch onto it because you did that.
Right.
Oh, I know.
So there's a meaningful aspect to even making mistakes and getting out there and just looking stupid or being willing to fail publicly.
And it's funny because it's actually you mentioned Jeffrey Tucker. I think it was 2 years ago. He was giving a lecture at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, and I happened to be working in Pittsburgh at the time, so I was like, hey, I'm gonna go see what's up with him. Well, it turned out that after the event, we talked before the event. He and I had been talking for maybe a year or so on the internet, just chatting and video chat and stuff like that. And later, I found out, we're staying in the same hotel. So I see him at the lounge, and we're having drinks, and I expressed that to him even then, and he just told me, he said, don't worry about the fear. He's like, do what you believe, and there's always going to be somebody, there's always going to be a critic that has something to say about this. But if you really think that you're right, then just do it. And yeah, you're probably going to make mistakes, and you're going to do this and that, but that's a part of life. That's just how it works. Never be afraid to stand behind what you believe, because that's what really matters.
Yeah. And I think that communicating also is just a great way of your own personal journey as well. So not only does everyone else benefit from it, but a good example is the other day I was at a little whiskey tasting party, and on my right was a self-proclaimed libertarian, and on my left was a self-proclaimed Democrat, liberal. He's a biology professor, and
yes, perfect situations.
And we had some great talks, and nothing ever got hostile or anything. But unfortunately, I just got stumped. He brought up the situation in Iowa that's going on with clean rivers and waterways and such, and that they've largely, quote unquote, deregulated and are not necessarily following federal guidelines for the Clean Water Act. And it's resulted in terrible, terrible situations of cattle farmers polluting the rivers to the point where it's a mess, all kinds of ecology problems. And unfortunately, I was just ignorant about the situation. I'm like, I have no idea. You pulled something out of your hat and that I have no knowledge about, and so I really don't know what the answer is for you there, buddy. And he's like, well, this has been my experience with libertarian philosophy, is that it resulted in a mess, and it's been in there for 10 years and blah blah blah. Well, a couple weeks later, I talked to some of the fellows from the roundtable discussion on Mike's roundtable, and they brought up the nuisance laws and.
Right.
How a lot of those frivolous, they're called frivolous lawsuits, and Iowa has restricted those farmers, or restricted your ability to even sue those farmers. Yes.
So EPA did that as well, more on a national scope, but yeah.
Yeah, and so, there's kind of the answer, but of course, had I not gotten into the awkward situation of not knowing what to say to begin with, then I would have never been introduced to this whole concept of what was going on there. So I think it's just a fine example of being willing to, look dumb or make mistakes, and that's how we find answers.
Well, anytime you're, see, here's the thing, and it's something Stephen Kinsella talks about a lot, is that everybody's got a concept of property rights or property. It may be a collectivist type or some, which typically is a statist type because it kind of requires the state to enforce. But libertarians are very particular in that theirs is private, and it's not based on any just random reason. It comes down to conflict, and that's exactly what you're dealing with right there is conflict over property. Mm-hmm. And it's somebody polluting your property, or the scarce resource that represents your property, and so the libertarian is always what we're looking for is the resolution of conflict. It's the whole point of property rights to begin with, to decide who owns this, who owns that, and who cannot trespass upon this or that scarce or rivalrous good. And in that case, once you keep that in your frame of mind, and you realize that pollution going downstream is actually a trespass on other people's property, then that easily solves that problem. It's just that most leftists or Democrats or you're just your standard political type person in the United States, their concept of property is so arbitrary and so it has no real consistency behind it. They're dealing mostly with emotion or like the consequentialist type considerations. This happened, therefore, and it's like, no, that's not the way it works here. You really have to be consistent in your understanding of how to resolve conflict, and I think only the libertarian ethic is the one that does that.
Right. Or at least attempts to come up with definitions.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody attempts. It doesn't mean it's going to happen.
So you just touched on something there. You used the preface that in America, and I'm curious with your experience in the military and traveling, and we touched on this a little bit last time we talked about the different perspectives that are out there. How do you see the perception of property rights and what we might call libertarian ideas in other countries, and how we might be able to connect with people outside of the U.S. in helping them along with this type of reasoning?
Well, I'll say right now that in most countries the concept of private property rights is very screwed up, especially in the Middle East, where you got these rich guys that essentially they're kind of like it's almost like monarchy, except for it's more of a cartelized monarchy, so it's like a nobility type thing. So everybody's rights are second to theirs. Australia is very similar to the United States, I would say. They're a little bit more. They're very. I hate to say the word liberal because it's got a totally different meaning today than it did, in the stuff that I read. But modern liberal. They're very modern liberal. And India is still like in some sort of last throes of socialism. They're starting to see the market and they're starting to pull themselves out, but they're still not there yet. And well, there is the internet. Okay, I like to call it Gutenberg times 1,000 because it's taken away all the gatekeepers. Information can flow freely. Now, sure, some of these countries do censor their internet and whatnot, but you got to also understand that there's people working ways around that. P2P and other networks and cryptology and everything else. That it's really. I mean, I would say that the market is actually a few steps ahead of governments in that respect, because I've gotten in conversations with guys from China, you know, and it's like, well, how the hell did you get past their firewall? You know, like, I don't understand how they did it. And they're like, oh, don't worry about that, you know. And then I'm like, then I'm thinking, well, is this like a government agent from China, or is this like some real guy from China? But if you think about it, I mean, it's going to happen. You know, when the networks and information are essentially so interconnected, and the only real way that they can block information is either to kill the network entirely, which they're not going to do because they're dependent on it as well, or to figure out some sort of firewall or cryptological blocking mechanism to stop the information from getting through, which can always, in most cases, be bypassed in some way or another. I remember watching this video on YouTube where, like, in case, you know, the internet went down, and they had USB thumb drive, you know, drop spots and stuff. You know, like they're hiding them inside the mortar of bricks and stuff, and you just stand there and plug your computer in, act like you're just standing there. Like there's tons of ways to get information out there, and you could even see now with like Mises.org, like you got Mises Brazil, you got Mises Canada, you got Mises out in like Slovakia and Poland and all the, you know, apparently the information's getting out there. It's just, you know, may not be going as fast or as quickly as we would like, but that's the way human society works. Things don't always happen when you want them to happen, and they don't always happen as fast as you want them to happen. But when the information is out there and people know it's true, you can't stop that. You know, it continues, and you know, that's essentially how I look at the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, when you were talking, I was reminded too of a recent video I saw. I think it was on a TEDx talk or something, where Google has come out with essentially what will become a universal translator, much like we saw in Star Trek, and it actually works live in almost real time through Google Hangouts. So you can have a hangout with somebody who's speaking a different language, and then the computer literally comes up. You know, you say something, and then the computer translates it for you in a digital voice, and then the other person talks, and it goes back and forth. You know, it's kind of cool, you know, and that type of technology is going to accelerate so fast. You know, in a couple of years, we'll see that being ubiquitous, and we can have this type of conversation with somebody in Afghanistan, for instance.
Mm-hmm. That's
so
very interesting.
Yeah,
but of course, with dictation and like just Siri, you know, things like that use voice. I mean, there's going to be some hiccups, and I could see some people getting like, "What'd you say?"
Oh yeah.
No.
I'm sure it's not going to be you know, a perfect scenario initially, but with the acceleration of technology, it's going to be interesting to see how much smaller the world is about to get. And
it's good. I mentioned at the beginning of this with trade how small it's gotten already. I mean, people are starting to realize that it's really a small world.
Yeah.
Not as big as they thought it was.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to see where 3D printing is going to go as well, because it's almost taking the information age to the physical world.
Right.
You know, I saw a charity today. I didn't really click on the link, but I kind of got the gist from the ad for artificial hands, mechanical hands that can be made for $35. And now I've actually seen that they're made cheaper than this, but I'm assuming that covers the cost of getting these hands shipped out to amputees or people with birth defects and such who cannot afford them. And the first thing I thought of was third world countries, and you think of, you know, somebody who is a population who has a large birth defect due to water issues or whatever, and then all of a sudden you get a 3D printing technology that's opening up this communication, this gateway, and this prosperity that will come to a population that, you know, is completely out of touch with the world almost overnight. And it's really fascinating to think about.
This has implications for intellectual property. Now, this is something that guys like Mises immediately understood, that the information should always be free. It's you know, what we're dealing with is scarce resources. You know, you know, there's scarcity everywhere, and the best way to eliminate that is to get the information and ideas out as quickly as possible. And you're seeing that with a 3D printing, because that's totally, basically IP free. I mean, people are giving these things out, well, not the machines themselves, because that's a scarce resource. That's actual capital. But the information itself, the schematics, the CAD programs and everything, or CAD diagrams and everything else, I mean, that's, boom, that's getting out there everywhere. So, like, looking at something like 3D printing, which is still in its infancy. I mean, it's just started. I mean, I just became aware of it like 2 years ago.
Right.
You're seeing it develop so quickly right now because there is no gatekeeper on the information.
Right.
People are sharing this freely, and it's the same thing. Like, say, just recently, Tesla, with their vehicles, they've said that they're gonna, they're not gonna enforce any of their patents. They're gonna give them away for free, and that way, because they understand that when they do that, that's good. The progress of that particular industry is going to move so fast that there's nothing going to be able to stop it. But I do have one thing to mention, that patent statutes still exist. So if 10 years from now Tesla changes their mind, they could be like, we're going to sue you. It doesn't matter if they said that. There is no legal force behind just saying, oh, use my patents.
Yeah, well, there is one caveat to that, and that is if you don't actively protect your trademark and or patent, then there are statutes in place to say that, hey, you didn't protect this when you had the
right. Right.
So that's one workaround. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I'm actually going to be discussing it on a future show. About 2 years ago, I did a short video on Tesla and Houdini, of all people, to compare and contrast two people, with Elon Musk and Houdini, and their methods for protecting their quote-unquote intellectual property. And at the time, Elon Musk had come out with a recent video regarding the SpaceX program. And the video, I actually laughed out loud when he was talking, because he said that the reason he did not file patents on a lot of the SpaceX technology is that his competitors were the same people who were going to be enforcing the patent laws. His competitors are governments.
The governments, yeah.
And he didn't trust that governments wouldn't just rip him off anyway. So why go through the process of patent law? Because patents actually just would disclose a lot of his quote-unquote trade secrets. So his approach with SpaceX actually was just to keep things in-house and not disclose them through patents. Literally, quote-unquote, hiding his trade secrets from the government. Well, Houdini, actually, he had a ton of tricks that he had developed since childhood. His dad was a locksmith, and when he got out of handcuffs and locks and jails and things, this kind of thing, a lot of that was not trickery. He actually was busting the locks.
Right. Yeah,
he knew how to do it. He knew how to do it, and a lot of his tricks were pretty original. Everybody kind of steals from everybody else. And,
that's how society works.
Yeah, everything is a remix. Everything is a remix, right? So, and he wasn't afraid to admit that, but he also had a lot of unique perspectives on it. Well, back in the day, this is pre-internet, all this kind of thing, people were impersonating Houdini, saying, "Hey, I'm Houdini, come check out my show." The problem is some of these impersonators would suck, and so they were ruining his reputation. And some of them would either often even tour with him and show up in a town a week before his show and basically try to steal his audience, and claim to be him. And his response to that was actually to publish a book, which I own, which discloses how he did almost every trick that he did. And it was an interesting approach, because he's like, only the real Houdini would know how all of these are done. So I'm here to tell you, this is how they're all done. It's not. And he was also very anti-mystical. He was really pissed off at a lot of the mystics that took advantage of people at the time. So basically, the bottom line is his answer for intellectual property and how to protect his integrity and respect for his trade was to give away freely all of his information.
Are you a musician at all?
Yes. Yeah. I loosely termed. I play guitar and I love music, but I'm not that great.
Okay. Well, everything that I learned by emulating others. I mean, it wasn't until I got to a certain point that I could actually, use my own chops to come up with stuff and things like that. But I mean, just think of like blues, for instance. It's the same damn song every single time.
Yeah.
Well, not you know what I mean, but it's the same progression typically. Yeah. It might be a shuffle, or it might be in 12/8 rather than 4/4 or whatever. But you're still looking at the same 1/4/5 type progression.
1/4/5s and the 7 cycles and. Yeah.
Right. So and then the other thing is like, for instance, take a look at say Pink Floyd. If they all got back together and toured, I mean, everybody would be wanting to go see that. But if me and my buddies put together a cover band of Pink Floyd and we tried to tour, it's like nobody. It's like, who the hell wants to see you guys? It's we may be able to sell out a bar that holds 50 people, but certainly we're not going to sell out stadiums. This is how humans learn and get better and progress in life is through sharing and emulating each other. And indeed, that's how culture comes about. That's how civilization comes about. Because certainly, before we even had any sort of civilization, I mean, it's not as if one guy built a fire and then he formed some sort of state to stop everybody else from making fires. No, everybody else, it spread. That knowledge spread, and had that something like that not happened, or hunting or whatever, or say with like what's called the expensive tissue hypothesis, where ancient man started like scavenging brains and meats and stuff like that. I mean, we wouldn't have even developed ethics or a large enough brain to even think of ethics, And you see this in the natural world as well, that other animals emulate other animals when they see that there's success there. That's just how it works.
It's an exciting time to be alive. Instead of just existing, you can truly live all your life. Join our open discussions on business and personal growth, agorism and finances, lifestyle enjoyment, radical health and life extension, science and technology, art and philosophy, all of the aspects to learn how to truly live all your life. LiveAllYourLife.com. Be sure to check us out again next week as we continue this conversation with Joseph Fetz.
I was entirely full of shit about me thinking I was entirely full of shit. If that makes any sense.
In addition to the follow-up conversation with Joseph, we're going to be meeting Tiger Lily GZZ and exploring her adventure to Mexico on the back of her Victory Kingpin motorcycle as she gets away from it all on her own. It should be a great talk, guys. Be sure to hang out now for Anthony Antonello's show, and right after that at 8, I'll be joining the Voluntary Virtues Roundtable discussion hosted by Mike Shanklin, so be sure to check that out. Until next week, live all your life. It's an exciting time to be alive. Instead of just existing, you can truly live all your life. Join our open discussions on business and personal growth, agorism and finances, lifestyle enjoyment, radical health and life extension, science and technology, art and philosophy, all of the aspects to learn how to truly live all your life. LiveAllYourLife.com.